A blood-red sun sagged low over the Wyoming plains, casting jagged shadows across the land. The air was thick with dust, the scent of dry sage clinging to every breath. A lone rider kicked up a storm of dirt in his wake, but he wasn't alone. Just behind him, half a dozen more thundered across the earth, their spurs glinting like the steel of drawn blades. And 100 yards ahead, Eleanor Graves ran. Her dress was torn at the hem, the once fine blue fabric muddied and snagged with burrs. Her breath burned in her chest, her heart pounding with the rhythm of desperation. She hadn't stopped running since she'd bolted from the settlement at dusk, but the men behind her were closing in. "Ellie!" A voice roared through the dusk. Silas McCall. The sound of his name alone sent a shudder through her. He was close, too close. She veered left, plunging through a thicket of brittle shrubs, her boots slipping on loose soil. The scent of horses filled the air as the men split off, their voices calling to one another. She had minutes, maybe less. A gnarled tree stood alone at the edge of a dried-out creek bed, its roots thick enough to conceal her. She dropped to her stomach, pressing herself against the dirt as hoofbeats rattled the ground. Silas reined in his horse just a yard from where she lay hidden, his silhouette a dark cutout against the dying light. He was a man built for control, his face all sharp angles and unwavering confidence. He pulled off his hat, raking a hand through damp hair, and scanned the land like a wolf sniffing out his prey. "She didn't make it far," he growled. "She's out here somewhere." Another man rode up beside him. Buckley, Silas's right-hand thug. "Want me to get the hounds from town?" No, Silas spat into the dirt. "She'll come crawling back when the cold sets in." Ellie clenched her fists in the dirt. She'd die before she crawled back. Minutes passed before the men turned their horses and rode off, their figures swallowed by the twilight. But she knew better than to think they were gone. Silas wasn't a man to give up what he believed was his. Slowly, painfully, Ellie pulled herself to her feet and forced her legs to move. She had no map, no plan, just an understanding that any road leading back to the settlement was one she could never take. The land stretched out before her in endless miles of open sky and raw earth, a wild country that cared nothing for the likes of her. The Shoshone called this land home. The white settlers feared it, and somewhere in its vastness, she had to find a way to disappear. She walked until her legs shook beneath her, until the stars burned white overhead and the night air turned sharp with cold. Her breath curled in front of her, each step heavier than the last. And then, just ahead, a flicker of movement. She froze. A figure stood at the edge of a ridge, barely visible in the dim light. He was tall, his frame lean but powerful, wrapped in a deerskin coat. A bough rested at his side, a long knife strapped to his belt. Even from here, she could see the way he stood, unafraid, unmoving. A Shoshone warrior. Ellie's throat tightened. She had heard the stories. White men whispered them over campfires. Stories of scalping, of war parties, of ghost-like riders who could disappear into the plains. But she had also heard other stories, ones her father had never wanted her to believe. Stories of a people who had lived on this land long before settlers ever claimed it as their own. She took a step back. The warrior's head tilted slightly, but he made no move toward her. Ellie's voice cracked. She swallowed. "I don't mean any harm." The warrior studied her, his face unreadable. His hair was dark, tied back from his face, and his skin was bronze from years under the sun. He didn't reach for his bow, but he didn't lower his guard either. Ellie lifted her hands. "I just need to." The sound of hoofbeats cut through the night. Her heart clenched. Silas. He had doubled back. The warrior's gaze flicked past her, toward the distant sound. Then, with an ease that sent a shiver down her spine, he turned and disappeared over the ridge. Ellie hesitated only a moment before following. She scrambled up the uneven slope, rocks cutting into her palms. By the time she reached the top, the warrior was already ahead of her, moving soundlessly through the trees. She hurried after him, breath coming in ragged gasps. After several minutes, he finally stopped. They stood on a small plateau overlooking a winding river below. The moon bathed everything in silver light. The warrior turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You run from them," he said. His voice was deep, steady. Ellie nodded. "Yes." "They hunt you." Another nod. "Yes." Silence stretched between them. Then, without warning, he turned and began walking again. "Wait." Ellie took a step forward. If you stay here," he said without looking back, "they will find you." It wasn't an invitation, but it wasn't a dismissal either. Ellie glanced over her shoulder, back toward the darkness she had come from. Silas was out there, somewhere, and this warrior, this stranger, was leaving. She took a deep breath. Then she followed. The journey was grueling. Chayton, as she later learned his name to be, moved with a grace that made Ellie feel like a stumbling child. He did not speak unless necessary, and he seemed to expect her to keep up without question. By the time dawn began to creep over the horizon, Ellie's legs trembled beneath her. She hadn't eaten, hadn't rested, and every muscle screamed for relief. Chayton stopped near a creek, filling a water skin before handing it to her. She drank greedily. "Why help me?" she asked finally. Chayton studied her for a long moment before answering. "A white woman running alone in these lands does not live long." Ellie swallowed. It wasn't the answer she'd expected, but it was the truth. Over the next few days, she learned more about him. Not because he told her, but because she paid attention. Chayton was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He moved through the wilderness like he was part of it, his senses sharper than any hunter she had ever known. He carried the weight of loss in his eyes, though he never spoke of it. Ellie tried to prove herself useful, but she was woefully unprepared for life beyond the settlement. She failed at setting traps, nearly cut herself skinning a rabbit, and tripped over her own feet more times than she could count. But she learned, and Chayton, despite his silence, did not abandon her. One evening, as they sat around a small fire, she found herself watching him. His hands, calloused but steady, worked a blade across a piece of wood, shaping it with quiet patience. "Silas won't stop looking for me," she said softly. Chayton didn't look up. "No. If he finds me," she trailed off. Chayton set the knife down. His gaze met hers, steady, unwavering. "Then we make sure he doesn't." Something in the way he said it sent a shiver down her spine. Not in fear, but in something else. Something that felt a lot like trust. The fire crackled between them, the scent of burning wood thick in the air. The world beyond their small camp was dark and endless. But for the first time since she had run, Ellie did not feel alone. Silas was still out there. The past still lurked behind her. But so did Chayton. And for now, that was enough. Dawn broke over the high desert in hues of amber and rose, casting long shadows across the land. A wind stirred through the pines, whispering secrets of old, but the silence between Ellie and Chayton remained unbroken. They moved through the wilderness as two spirits bound by circumstance, neither speaking unless the moment required it. The air was heavy with the weight of unspoken thoughts, yet neither seemed eager to break the stillness. Ellie had never known a man like Chayton before. He did not ask her why she had run, nor did he press her with questions about the past she carried like a brand upon her skin. He simply led her forward, through jagged canyons and open plains, away from the reach of the men who hunted her. On the third morning, she awoke to the scent of fresh earth and pine resin. Chayton was crouched by the creek, his dark hair damp from the morning mist, his hands deftly tying the sinew of a newly made bow. Ellie sat up, wincing at the stiffness in her back. Sleeping on the ground was something she still wasn't used to. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice rough from sleep. Chayton didn't look at her. "North." She frowned. "That's not much of an answer." He glanced at her then, his expression unreadable. "Is all you need." Ellie exhaled sharply. He wasn't one for conversation, that much was clear. But something in his eyes told her there was more beneath the surface, a storm contained behind years of silence. As they broke camp, Ellie tried not to dwell on the ache in her limbs. She had lived a life of comfort before, one of warm hearths and well-baked bread, of Sundays spent in church and evenings filled with polite conversation. That life had shattered the day she agreed to marry Silas McCall. He had been charming at first, all smooth words and easy smiles, a man who knew how to make a girl feel like the center of the world. But beneath that polished exterior lurked a darkness she hadn't seen until it was too late. When the first bruises came, he had whispered apologies. When the second and third followed, he no longer felt the need. She had run because she'd had no choice. Because if she had stayed, she would have belonged to him, body and soul, until there was nothing left of Eleanor Graves at all. A branch snapped somewhere in the distance, dragging her from her thoughts. Chayton raised a hand, signaling for her to stop. Ellie froze, heart hammering against her ribs. The warrior crouched low, scanning the trees. His posture was tense, his fingers resting lightly on the hilt of the knife at his waist. Ellie barely dared to breathe. Then, from the shadows of the trees, a rider emerged. He was a lean man, wrapped in a thick buffalo hide coat, his face marked with age and experience. His horse, a sturdy Mustang, moved with the easy gait of an animal well-traveled. But it wasn't the stranger that made Ellie's breath catch. It was the three men who followed behind him, rifles strapped to their saddles. Chayton's hand twitched toward his knife. The leader of the group reined in his horse and regarded them both with a slow, appraising glance. "Didn't expect to find company out here," he said, his voice smooth as whiskey. Chayton didn't answer. Ellie fought the urge to step back. There was something about the way the men sat in their saddles, the casual ease of their posture, that put her on edge. They weren't cowhands or traitors. These were men who lived outside the law, and they carried that knowledge like a second skin. The leader smirked. "Ain't much for conversation, are you?" His gaze slid to Ellie, his smile widening. "And what's this?" "A little runaway." Ellie's blood turned to ice. "Leave," Chayton said, his voice a low warning. The men chuckled. The leader swung down from his horse, his boots kicking up dust as he stepped forward. Now, no need for hostility. We're just passing through." His eyes never left Ellie. "Though I gotta say, I wouldn't mind a little company on the road." Chayton moved so fast Ellie barely saw it happen. 1 second he was standing still, the next his knife was drawn, the steel gleaming in the morning light. The man stopped, his easy smirk faltering for the first time. The silence stretched thin between them, crackling with unspoken threats. Then, with a lazy chuckle, the leader lifted his hands. "Easy, friend. Didn't mean no harm." He turned back to his horse, but before mounting, he met Ellie's gaze once more. "Be careful out here, darlin'. Ain't all men as friendly as us." Then they were gone, disappearing down the ridge in a cloud of dust. Ellie let out a shaky breath. Chayton sheathed his knife, but didn't look at her. "Keep moving." She did. For hours, neither of them spoke. The encounter left a sour taste in Ellie's mouth, a reminder of how dangerous the world truly was. She had traded one cage for another, this one vast and unforgiving, ruled by men who saw women like her as little more than property. As they walked, she found herself watching Chayton. He was different. His silence wasn't cruel. His strength wasn't a tool for domination. He had stood between her and danger without hesitation, not because he saw her as weak, but because he understood the weight of survival. That night, as they sat by the fire, Ellie broke the silence. "You didn't have to do that." Chayton didn't look up. "Do what?" "Draw your knife. Stand between me and them." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, finally he spoke. "You are not theirs to take." Ellie's throat tightened. For so long, she had been made to feel like something to be owned. By Silas, by the laws that refused to protect women like her, by the expectations of a world that had never been kind. And yet, here was a man who had no reason to help her, who owed her nothing, and he had risked himself for her without a second thought. "Thank you," she whispered. Chayton nodded, but he said nothing more. The days stretched into one another, their path winding ever northward. They crossed rivers, climbed rocky ridges, and camped beneath the stars. Ellie learned how to move more quietly, how to read the signs of an approaching storm, how to tell which plants were safe to eat. And slowly, without realizing when it had started, she began to trust him. One evening, as they sat by a narrow stream, She caught herself smiling at something he had said, some dry remark laced with the sharp humor she had come to recognize in him. He raised a brow. "You find something amusing?" She shrugged. "I didn't know you had a sense of humor." His lips twitched. "I do not waste words on those who do not listen." Ellie smirked. "And I suppose I've earned the right?" Chayton studied her for a long moment, then nodded. That night, as Ellie lay awake beneath the wide stretch of sky, she felt something shift inside her. She was still running. Silas was still hunting her. But she wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time in a long, long time, she felt something dangerously close to hope. The wind howled through the canyon, sweeping down in furious gusts that rattled the scrub and sent dust swirling into the night air. Ellie crouched low behind the jagged rocks, her breath coming fast and shallow. Chayton was beside her, his body motionless, every muscle coiled like a spring. Below them, at the base of the ridge, the flickering glow of a campfire cast restless shadows across the dry earth. For men, armed, and waiting. Ellie clenched her fists. She recognized them. The same men who had crossed their path days ago. The same ones who had looked at her like she was something to be claimed. She should have known they wouldn't let it rest. Chayton whispered, "They have been tracking us." Ellie swallowed hard. "What do we do?" His dark eyes flicked toward her, measuring. "We do not let them find us." She knew what he meant. If they were caught, there would be no reasoning, no mercy. They would drag her back to whatever fate they had planned, and Chayton, they would kill him without hesitation. He motioned for her to stay low, then began moving along the ridge, his steps light and soundless. Ellie followed, every nerve in her body stretched taut. Then a rock shifted beneath her boot. A sharp clatter echoed through the canyon. Silence. Then, there, up on the ridge, a gunshot split the night. Ellie flinched as a bullet struck the rock near her shoulder, sending a spray of stone shards into the air. "Run," Chayton ordered. Ellie didn't hesitate. She turned and bolted, her heart hammering against her ribs. Behind her, she heard the pounding of boots, the curses of the men as they scrambled up the ridge in pursuit. Chayton led the way, weaving through the labyrinth of boulders and gullies with the effortless grace of a man who had spent his life in the wild. Ellie fought to keep up, her breath burning in her lungs. Another shot rang out. Dirt exploded at her feet. They wouldn't stop. Not now. Ahead, the path narrowed to a steep drop-off. Ellie skidded to a halt, eyes darting to Chayton. He looked at the sheer rock face, then at her. "No choice," he murmured. Before she could question him, he grabbed her wrist and pulled her forward. They leapt. Ellie's stomach lurched as they plunged into the darkness. The wind rushed past her ears, her body weightless for a split second before she crashed into the slope below, tumbling down in a chaotic blur of motion. Rocks scraped her hands, the impact knocking the air from her lungs. When she finally stopped rolling, she lay still, gasping for breath. Chayton landed a few feet away, already rising. He reached for her, gripping her arm. "Get up." Ellie forced herself to move. Everything hurt, but they couldn't stop. Not now. Shouts echoed from above. The men were still coming. Chayton pulled her into the shadows of a narrow ravine, pressing her back against the cold stone. "Stay quiet," he whispered. Ellie nodded, swallowing hard. Footsteps pounded overhead. The men were searching, their voices carrying through the night. "She couldn't have gone far," one of them growled. Another spat. "That damn engine's got her hit somewhere." "Keep looking." Ellie's fingers curled into fists. She could feel Chayton's tension beside her, his breath slow and steady despite the danger pressing in around them. Minutes passed. Long, agonizing minutes. Then, finally, "They're gone," Chayton murmured. Ellie exhaled, her body sagging against the rock. The terror in her chest hadn't fully faded, but for now, they had survived. She turned to Chayton, her pulse still racing. "What now?" His expression was unreadable. "We make sure they do not follow us again." The meaning behind his words was clear. This wasn't over. Not yet. The wind carried the scent of rain, though the sky above remained an endless stretch of stars. Ellie tightened her grip on the rifle Chayton had handed her, its weight unfamiliar but reassuring. The night was quiet, too quiet. The men hadn't given up. She could feel it, the way the silence pressed in around them like the breath of a predator waiting to strike. Chayton knelt beside her in the brush, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond. "They will come," he said, voice low. Ellie swallowed. "Then we'll be ready." He glanced at her, and in the faint light, she saw something unreadable flicker in his eyes. Approval. Maybe, or something deeper, something he wasn't willing to name. A twig snapped. Ellie froze. Chayton didn't move, but his hand shifted toward his knife. A figure moved between the trees, shadowed against the night. Then another. 4. The same 4 men. They had circled back. Ellie's pulse pounded in her ears. They were close. Too close. Then the leader spoke, his voice a low rasp. "I know you're out there, girl. Ain't no sense in running." Ellie's fingers tightened on a rifle. Chayton murmured, "Wait." She forced herself to stay still. The man took another step forward, boot crunching against dry earth. "We don't want no trouble. Just hand the girl over, and you could go on your way, Injun." Ellie felt Chayton stiffen beside her. The quiet stretched thin. Then, in a voice as steady as the ground beneath them, he answered, "She is not yours to take." A low chuckle. "And up to you now, is it?" The hammer of a revolver clicked. Ellie's breath caught. Then, a sharp whistle split the air. The horses. They spooked, rearing up, their hooves kicking wildly as they yanked against their tethers. One broke free, bolting into the night. The men cursed, their attention snapping to the chaos. Chayton moved. Fast. His knife flashed in the dark, a blur of motion as he lunged, striking before they could react. The leader grunted in pain, stumbling back as steel sliced across his arm. Another man swung his rifle, but Chayton was faster, twisting out of reach and driving his blade up under the man's ribs. Ellie raised the rifle, her hands trembling, but she held firm. One of the men turned toward her, gun raised. She fired. The kick sent her stumbling, but the shot found its mark. The man dropped, a choked sound escaping his throat before he hit the ground. 2 down. The leader snarled, clutching his bleeding arm. "You think you can?" Chayton didn't let him finish. He struck hard, driving the man to his knees. The knife hovered at his throat. A beat of silence. Then Chayton spoke, quiet and final. "You will not follow us." The man's breath came fast, fear creeping into his eyes. He nodded. Chayton stepped back. The leader clutched his wound, stumbling to his feet. He didn't look back as he turned and ran. The last man followed, disappearing into the night. Ellie exhaled, the tension draining from her limbs. It was over. Chayton met her gaze. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "No." "You." He wiped the blood from his knife. "No." A pause. Then Ellie whispered, "I killed him." Chayton was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "You did what you had to." She nodded, though the weight of it still pressed against her chest. Chayton turned toward the open plains. "We should go." Ellie hesitated, then followed. Dawn was breaking.